The hospital room smelled of antiseptic and fading flowers, but it was my mother's trembling whisper that choked the air from my lungs. "Julian," she said, her voice a fragile thread. "Your father, he's not what you think." I leaned closer, her cold hand gripping mine, and in that moment, the world I'd known for 28 years shattered. I'd grown up in a quiet suburb of Philadelphia, where life moved like a metronome, predictable, steady, safe. My dad, Robert, was the kind of man who mowed the lawn every Saturday, coached my little league games, and kissed my mom, Eleanor, on the cheek every night before dinner. They were the picture of normal, the blueprint of an American family. But as I sat by her bedside in that sterile hospital room in the spring of 2025, her words unraveled everything. "He loved someone else, a man," she confessed, tears pooling in her tired eyes. "He hid it for us, for you, for 40 years. My heart stopped, not out of judgment, but because I'd been carrying my own secret, one I thought I'd buried deeper than Dad ever could. "I'm Julian Carter, a graphic designer living in New York City, and I'm gay. I'd known since I was 13, sneaking glances at my best friend, Marcus, during gym class, my pulse racing in a way I couldn't explain. I'd come out to my mom at 20, but Dad? I could never bring myself to tell him. He was a man of few words, his emotions locked behind a stoic mask I'd never dared to crack. Now, as Mom's words sank in, I realized I'd never truly known him. The man who'd raised me, who'd taught me to throw a curveball and change a tire, had lived a lie to protect us. But from what? And why? The funeral was a blur of black suits and murmured condolences. I stood by Dad's side, watching him clutch Mom's favorite scarf, his face unreadable. At 58, he was still handsome, salt and pepper hair, broad shoulders, and eyes that held a quiet storm. I wanted to ask him about Mom's words, but the weight of her absence silenced me. Instead, I returned to my life in New York, to my loft in Brooklyn, where I buried myself in work and tried to forget. But the truth was a splinter under my skin, impossible to ignore. A week later, I met Ethan at a gallery opening in Chelsea. He was a photographer, all sharp cheekbones and easy smiles, with a laugh that felt like sunlight breaking through clouds. We talked for hours, our conversation spilling into a late-night diner over greasy fries and milkshakes. "You seem distracted," he said, his hazel eyes searching mine. I wanted to tell him everything, about Mom, about Dad, about the secret I'd kept from my own father, but I didn't. Instead, I kissed him under a flickering streetlight, and for a moment, the world felt whole again. But the splinter remained. I started noticing things I'd overlooked. Dad's solitary habits, the way he'd linger over old photos in the attic, the letters I'd found as a kid, tucked away in a locked box, addressed to someone named L. I'd never thought much of them, but now they haunted me. Who was L? And why had Dad chosen a life of silence over love? One evening, I called him. "Dad, can we talk?" I asked, my voice shaking. There was a long pause, then a quiet, "Sure, kid." I drove to Philadelphia the next day, my stomach knotted with questions I wasn't sure I could ask. When I arrived, Dad was in the backyard, pruning roses Mom had planted years ago. His hands moved with precision, but his eyes were distant, lost in a place I couldn't reach. "Dad," I started, sitting on the porch steps. "Mom told me something before she passed." His hands froze, the clippers hovering over a rosebud. "She said you loved someone else. A man." The words hung between us, heavy and sharp. For a moment, I thought he'd deny it, brush it off like he always did when things got too real. But then he set the clippers down and looked at me, his eyes raw with something I'd never seen before, vulnerability. "His name was Liam," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "We met in college. I loved him more than I thought a person could love anyone." My chest tightened. Dad sat beside me, his shoulders slumping. "But it was the 80s, Julian. Being gay wasn't like it is now. My parents, your grandparents, they would have disowned me. And then I met your mom, and she was kind, and I thought maybe I could be someone else." I listened, my heart pounding, as he told me about Liam, his quick wit, his love for jazz, the way he'd made Dad feel alive. They'd been together in secret for 2 years, stealing moments in dorm rooms and late-night drives, until Liam wanted more. "He wanted us to move to San Francisco, to live openly," Dad said, his voice cracking. "But I was scared. I chose safety. I chose your mom, And I don't regret you, Julian, but I regret what I did to him. I wanted to be angry, to scream at him for hiding, for lying, for making me feel like I had to hide too. But all I felt was grief, for him, for Liam, for the life they could have had. Why didn't you tell me? I asked. I'm gay, Dad. I've been terrified to tell you. And all this time, you were carrying the same secret. His eyes widened, and for the first time in years, he pulled me into a hug. I'm so sorry, son, he whispered. I thought I was protecting you. We sat there, the roses swaying in the breeze, and I realized we were both starting over. Two men, bound by blood and secrets, trying to find a way forward. That night, I drove back to New York, my mind spinning. Ethan was waiting at my apartment, a bottle of wine and 2 glasses on the table. You okay? He asked, brushing a strand of hair from my forehead. I told him everything, the words spilling out like a dam breaking. He listened, his hand steady in mine, and when I finished, he kissed me softly. You're not alone in this, he said. And for the first time, I believed it. The next few weeks were a strange dance of discovery and distance. I threw myself into my work, sketching logos and layouts for clients. But my mind was elsewhere, on Dad, on Liam, on the life I'd never known he'd left behind. Ethan became my anchor, his steady presence pulling me back when I started to spiral. We'd spend evenings walking through Central Park, his camera slung around his neck, capturing the way the city glowed at dusk. You're thinking about him again, aren't you? He'd say, nudging me with his shoulder. I'd nod, and he'd squeeze my hand, letting the silence speak for us. Back in Philadelphia, Dad started opening up in ways I hadn't expected. He sent me old photos, snapshots of him and Liam at college, their arms slung around each other, grins wide and unguarded. In one, they were at a music festival, Dad's hair long and messy, Liam's eyes sparkling with mischief. We were so young, Dad wrote in a text, and I could feel the ache in his words. I wanted to know more about Liam, about what had happened after Dad chose Mom, but I didn't know how to ask without breaking him. One Saturday, I found myself back at Dad's house, sifting through the attic for answers. The locked box I'd seen as a kid was still there, tucked under a pile of Mom's old quilts. I hesitated, then pried it open with a screwdriver. Inside were letters, dozens of them, yellowed and creased, all addressed to Rob in a looping scrawl. Liam's words were vivid, raw, full of love and frustration. I can't keep hiding, he wrote in one. You're breaking my heart, but I'll always love you. My throat tightened as I read, imagining Dad reading these alone, year after year, carrying a love he could never reclaim. I called Ethan that night, my voice shaky. I don't know how he did it, I said. 40 years of pretending. I can't even hide for a day without feeling like I'm suffocating. Ethan was quiet for a moment, then said, maybe he didn't want you to have to hide like he did. His words hit me hard, and I realized I needed to find Liam, not just for Dad, but for me. The search wasn't easy. Liam's last name, Harper, was common, and the trail was cold. I scoured social media, old college records, anything I could find. Ethan helped, his knack for research uncovering a Liam Harper who'd moved to Seattle in the 90s. Could be him, Ethan said, showing me a grainy photo from an art gallery's website. The man was older, but the eyes were unmistakable, the same ones from Dad's photos, still bright, still kind. I didn't tell Dad what I was doing. I wasn't sure if he'd want Liam found, or if it would hurt too much. But I needed to know what had become of the man who'd shaped my father's life. Ethan and I flew to Seattle, a city of drizzle and coffee shops, tracking down the gallery where Liam worked as a curator. When we walked in, I saw him immediately, tall, silver-haired, arranging a display of abstract paintings. My heart raced as I approached. Liam Harper? I asked. He turned, his smile polite but curious. I'm Julian Carter, Robert Carter's son. His face changed, a mix of shock and something softer, like recognition. Rob's son, he said, almost to himself. We sat in a quiet corner of the gallery, and he told me his side of the story. He'd loved Dad fiercely, but when Dad chose a normal life, Liam had left for the West Coast, building a life where he could be himself. I never stopped thinking about him, Liam admitted, his voice steady but laced with regret. But I had to let him go. I showed him a photo of Dad now, pruning roses in the backyard. Liam's eyes softened. He looks happy, he said. but I could hear the question in his voice. I told him about Mom's death, about Dad's confession, about the letters. He never stopped loving you, I said, and Liam's composure cracked, just for a moment. When I got back to New York, I told Dad about Liam. His hands shook as he listened, and for the first time, I saw him cry. I thought I was doing the right thing, he said. For you, for your mom. But I lost so much. I hugged him, feeling the weight of his choices and my own. It's not too late, I whispered, hoping I was right. Ethan and I spent the next weekend together, cooking dinner in my cramped apartment, laughing over spilled sauce and too much wine. He kissed me as the city hummed outside, and I felt a spark of hope. Maybe Dad could find that too. Maybe we both could. The idea of Dad reconnecting with Liam consumed me. I'd seen the way his face lit up when he talked about their college days, the way his voice softened at Liam's name. But I also saw the fear in his eyes, the kind that comes from decades of hiding. I didn't push him, not yet. Instead, I focused on my own life, on Ethan, whose presence was like a steady heartbeat in the chaos of my thoughts. Ethan and I were falling hard for each other. He'd drag me to obscure art shows, where we'd debate the meaning of splattered paint, or we'd spend lazy Sundays in bed, his head on my chest as he read me snippets from his favorite novels. But even as I lost myself in him, Dad's story lingered. I started inviting Dad to New York more often, hoping the city's energy might loosen the grip of his past. He'd come for dinner, marveling at my loft's exposed brick and Ethan's photos pinned to the walls. "You've got a good thing here," he'd say, glancing at Ethan with a knowing smile. But he never stayed long, always retreating to Philadelphia, to the house that held too many ghosts. One night, over beers at a dive bar, I told Ethan I wanted to bring Dad and Liam together. "It's risky," he warned, his fingers tracing the rim of his glass. "What if it's too much for your dad? Or for Liam?" I knew he was right, but I couldn't shake the image of Dad's trembling hands, the letters in the attic, the life he'd let slip away. "They deserve a chance," I said. Ethan nodded, his hand finding mine under the table. "Then let's make it happen." I called Liam the next day. He was hesitant, his voice guarded. "I don't know if Rob wants to see me, Julian. It's been so long." I told him about Dad's tears, about the roses he still tended, about the man who'd never stopped loving him. "Just think about it," I said. A week later, Liam called back. "I'll come to New York," he said, "but I need you to be there." The plan was simple, a quiet dinner at my apartment. I didn't tell Dad who was coming, only that I wanted him to meet someone special. When he arrived, he looked nervous, tugging at the collar of his button-down shirt. Ethan was in the kitchen, stirring a pot of risotto, his easy charm filling the room. The doorbell rang, and my heart leapt into my throat. Liam stood there, older but still striking, his silver hair catching the light. "Julian," he said, his voice warm but unsteady. I hugged him, then led him inside. Dad was at the window, looking out at the city. When he turned and saw Liam, time seemed to stop. His face went pale, then flushed, his eyes wide with disbelief. "Liam," he whispered, like he was afraid saying the name too loud would make him disappear. Liam stepped forward, his own eyes glistening. "Hey, Rob," he said, his voice breaking. They stood there, two men who'd loved each other across decades, separated by fear and choices, now face to face. I expected awkwardness, maybe even anger, but instead, they hugged, fierce, desperate, like they were making up for lost time. Ethan squeezed my hand, and I realized I was crying. We ate dinner, the conversation tentative at first, then flowing as they reminisced about college, about jazz clubs and late-night talks. I watched Dad come alive, his laughter louder than I'd ever heard. Liam, too, seemed lighter, his smiles unguarded. After dinner, Ethan and I slipped onto the balcony, giving them space. "You did a good thing," Ethan whispered, his arms around me. I leaned into him, the city sprawling below us, and felt a weight lift. But I knew this was only the beginning. Dad and Liam had years of pain to untangle, and I had my own questions about love, about family, about what it meant to be honest with yourself. The next morning, Dad called me. "I don't know what happens next," he said, his voice raw but hopeful. "But thank you, Julian, for seeing me." I smiled, tears stinging my eyes. "I see you, Dad," I said, "and I'm proud of you." Life after that dinner felt like stepping into a new world. Dad started visiting New York more often, sometimes with Liam, sometimes alone. They were cautious, like two people learning to walk again after years of standing still. I'd catch them exchanging glances, small smiles that carried the weight of their shared history. Ethan and I watched from the sidelines, cheering them on while navigating our own relationship. Love, I was learning, was messy and beautiful, full of risks and rewards. One afternoon, Dad and I went for a walk in Prospect Park. The leaves were turning, a riot of red and gold, and he seemed lighter than I'd ever seen him. "I'm thinking of selling the house," he said suddenly. I stopped, surprised. That house was Mom, their marriage, their life together. "It's time," he said, his voice steady. "I want to start over, maybe here in the city. Be closer to you. And maybe Liam." My heart swelled. For the first time, I saw a future where Dad could be himself, unburdened by the past. But not everyone was ready to let go. My Aunt Clara, Mom's sister, called me one evening, her voice sharp with disapproval. "Your father's making a fool of himself," she said. "Parading around with that man after everything your mother did for him." I bristled, my loyalty to Dad flaring. "He's not parading," I snapped. "He's living." Mom knew, Aunt Clara. She wanted him to be happy. The line went silent, and I hung up, my hands shaking. Ethan pulled me into his arms, letting me rant until the anger faded. "Family's complicated," he said, and I nodded, knowing he was right. Liam, too, had his struggles. He'd built a life in Seattle, with friends and a career, and coming back to Dad meant uprooting everything. "I'm scared, Julian," he admitted one night over coffee. "What if we're too different now? What if the past is all we have?" I thought of Ethan, of the way we fought and made up, of the trust we were building. "You won't know unless you try," I said. "And Dad's worth it." Liam smiled, his eyes crinkling. "You're a good kid," he said. "Rob's lucky to have you." As winter approached, Dad and Liam started spending more time together. They'd go to jazz clubs, reminiscing about the music they'd loved, or sit in my apartment, swapping stories about the '80s. I loved seeing Dad laugh, his shoulders relaxed, his guard down. But there were moments of tension too, arguments about the years lost, the choices made. One night, I overheard them in my kitchen, voices raised. "You left me no choice, Rob," Liam said. "You chose her." Dad's voice was soft, broken. "I chose safety, Liam. I was wrong." I held my breath, waiting for the fallout. But instead, I heard the clink of glasses, then silence. When I peeked in, they were holding each other, foreheads pressed together, just like Ethan and me on that rooftop. Ethan and I were growing closer, too. He moved into my loft, his cameras and books mingling with my sketches and coffee mugs. We fought over stupid things, like whose turn it was to do dishes, but we always found our way back to each other. One night, as we lay in bed, he traced circles on my chest and said, "I want to meet your dad properly, as your boyfriend." My heart skipped. I'd been hesitant to label us, afraid of what it meant to be so vulnerable. But I nodded, kissing him softly. "He'll love you," I said. The holidays brought a new challenge. Dad wanted to spend Christmas in New York with Liam and me. It was a bold step, a public declaration of their rekindled connection. I invited them to our loft, where Ethan and I decorated with string lights and a lopsided tree. When they arrived, Dad's arm was around Liam's shoulders, a quiet defiance in his smile. We ate, laughed, and played terrible holiday music, and for a moment, I forgot the weight of the past. But later, as we cleaned up, Dad pulled me aside. "I'm scared, Julian," he admitted. "What if I'm not enough for him anymore?" I hugged him, my throat tight. "You're enough, Dad. Just be you." The new year brought a fragile hope. Dad sold the house in Philadelphia, moving into a small apartment in Brooklyn, just a few blocks from me. Liam split his time between Seattle and New York, testing the waters of a life with Dad. I watched them navigate their second chance, marveling at their courage. But I also saw the cracks, moments when doubt crept in, when the weight of 40 years apart felt too heavy. Ethan and I were building something solid, but it wasn't without its challenges. My work was demanding, and Ethan's freelance gigs often took him out of town. We'd argue over missed calls or forgotten plans, but we always came back to the rooftop, to the quiet moments where we'd hold each other and let the city hum around us. "We're gonna make it, right?" he'd ask, half joking, half serious. I'd kiss him and say, "We already are." One spring day, Dad called me, his voice urgent. "Liam's sick," he said. My stomach dropped. I met them at a hospital in Manhattan, where Liam was undergoing tests. It was a scare, a benign tumor, treatable, but it shook Dad to his core. I found him in the waiting room, head in his hands. "I can't lose him again," he said. I sat beside him, my own fear mirrored in his eyes. "You won't," I said, hoping I sounded more certain than I felt. Liam's recovery was slow but steady. Dad stayed by his side, bringing him books and sneaking in his favorite jazz records. I'd visit, bringing coffee and stories about Ethan's latest photo shoot, trying to keep things light. One day, Liam grabbed my hand, his grip surprisingly strong. "You gave us this, Julian," he said. "You brought us back together." I shook my head, embarrassed. "You two did that yourselves?" I said. But deep down, I felt a spark of pride. I'd helped them find each other, even if the road was rocky. As Liam got stronger, Dad started talking about the future. He wanted to travel with Liam, to see the places they'd dreamed of in college: Paris, New Orleans, Tokyo. I encouraged him, but I also saw the fear in his eyes. "What if I'm too old for this?" he asked one night, sitting on my couch. Ethan, ever the optimist, chimed in. "You're never too old for love, Rob," he said, grinning. Dad laughed, and I saw a spark of the man from those old photos, young and fearless. But the past wasn't done with us. Aunt Clara showed up at Dad's apartment one day, her face a mask of disapproval. "You're throwing away Eleanor's memory," she said, her voice cutting. Dad stood tall, his jaw set. "I loved Eleanor," he said, "but I'm done hiding who I am." I was proud of him, but Clara's words lingered, a reminder of the world's judgment. I worried about Dad, about how he'd handle the whispers and stares. But he was stronger than I'd given him credit for. Ethan and I threw a party for Liam's recovery, a small gathering on our rooftop. Dad and Liam danced to an old jazz tune, their movements slow but sure. I watched them, my arm around Ethan, and felt a lump in my throat. This was what love looked like. Not perfect, not easy, but real. Later, as we cleaned up, Ethan pulled me close. "You're my home, Julian," he said. I kissed him, the city lights twinkling below, and knew he was mine too. But life has a way of testing you. One night, Dad called, his voice shaking. "Liam's leaving," he said. "He's going back to Seattle." My heart sank. I drove to Dad's apartment, finding him staring at a photo of him and Liam, young and in love. "He says he needs space," Dad said. "Says we're moving too fast." I didn't know what to say, so I just sat with him, the silence heavy but comforting. The weeks after Liam's departure were quiet, too quiet. Dad threw himself into fixing up his apartment, painting walls and rearranging furniture, but I could see the emptiness in his eyes. I'd stop by with takeout, trying to fill the silence with stories about work or Ethan, but Dad's smiles were thin, forced. "I thought I could do this," he said one night, staring at a glass of whiskey. "But maybe some things are better left in the past." I refused to let him give up. I called Liam, my voice sharper than I intended. "He needs you," I said, "and I think you need him too." Liam was quiet for a long time, then said, "I'm scared, Julian. I don't know if I can be what he needs." I softened, hearing the same fear I'd felt with Ethan. "Just talk to him," I said. "You owe each other that." A week later, Liam showed up at Dad's apartment. I wasn't there, but Dad called me afterward, his voice lighter than it had been in weeks. "We talked," he said. "Really talked. We're going to try again, but slower this time." I grinned, relief flooding me. They weren't rushing into anything, but they were choosing each other, step by step. Ethan and I were learning that too. We'd had our own scare, a fight over a missed weekend trip that spiraled into doubts about our future. But we sat down, talked it out, and ended up laughing at how dramatic we'd been. "We're stuck with each other," Ethan said, kissing me. I nodded, knowing he was right. Love wasn't about perfection. It was about showing up, even when it was hard. Dad and Liam started over, spending weekends together, taking small trips upstate. They weren't perfect. There were still arguments, old wounds that flared, but they were honest. Dad came out to the rest of the family, bracing for backlash. Some, like Aunt Clara, cut him off, but others, like my cousin Mia, embraced him, inviting him and Liam to family dinners. It wasn't easy, but it was real. One summer evening, Ethan and I hosted a barbecue on our rooftop. Dad and Liam were there, along with friends and a few family members who'd come around. The air was warm, filled with laughter and the smell of grilled food. Dad raised a glass, his eyes shining. "To second chances," he said, looking at Liam, then at me. I clinked my glass against Ethan's, feeling the weight of everything we'd been through. Later, as the stars came out, Dad pulled me aside. "I'm proud of you, Julian," he said. "You taught me how to be brave." I hugged him, tears in my eyes. "You taught me first," I said. We stood there, father and son, both out, both free, surrounded by the people we loved. The road hadn't been easy, for Dad, for Liam, for me, for Ethan. But as I looked out at the city, Ethan's hand in mine, Dad and Liam laughing nearby, I knew it was worth it. Mom's words had broken us open, but they'd also set us free. We were living our truth, messy and beautiful, and that was enough.